Thursday here on Game Week. You know what that means. It is time for Crossover Thursday with Locked On Jaguars. I'm Kyle Krabs. We are previewing Jacksonville at Miami here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thursday here on the Locked On Network, and you know what that means. It is crossover time, brought to you by Prize Picks. I'm Kyle Krabs of Locked On Dolphins. I am joined by Tony Wiggins of Locked On Jaguars. AFC matchup, week one. Two Florida teams battling out at 1 o'clock in the Florida sun. So you know everybody's going to be sweating, having a good time. We're going to get into this matchup. Today's Crossover Thursday, though, is sponsored by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code in all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive a $50 bonus. Prize Picks, run your game. Tony, somebody's going to win this game, though, on Sunday. How's it going, man?
Man, it's going well. And you said sunny. I hope so, because I saw the weather forecast. I don't know what it looks like down in Miami, but it's raining in Jacksonville. And I heard it's going to rain this weekend in Miami. And maybe that factors in a little bit. Maybe it's an advantage for the visiting team.
Yeah, well, let's start with Jacksonville. Obviously, a team who has a lot of talent. When I look at this depth chart, I think that's the most prominent thing for me. A lot of new faces with pass catchers, particularly on the outside. Jacksonville, what's the biggest story for them offensively coming off of an end of season last year that really mirrored a lot of what the Dolphins experienced in 2022, where you're sitting at 8-3 and then you look up and you're like, oh, hey, we need to get a playoff spot here. And a rough finish for Jacksonville for a lot of different reasons.
Rough finish. You can't play around stuff. You can't hide deficiencies, and you can't hide weaknesses. In the NFL, those guys are just too good at it, and they're going to make you do that one thing you don't want to do. And with Jacksonville, too many times last year, their play calling that everyone couldn't stand, by the way, around here, and they wanted to blame offensive coordinator Press Taylor. If you look inside of it, though, the play calling, I believe, was a result of their talent deficiencies in certain areas. They didn't have catch radius wide receivers. Every throw had to be perfect. Their wide receivers weren't particularly thick built and strong. And then their offensive line left a lot to be desired in pass protection, and they couldn't run the ball in short yardage situations. So thus you get the play calling. Hopefully this year, the play calling won't be dictated by shortcomings. The offensive line is finally healthy. They added size and bigger receivers that can't get knocked off their line as much. So now Trevor Lawrence doesn't necessarily have to be perfect, which some people think, maybe he could be a lot better. I think for him to be better, you had to improve the things around him, and I believe the Jaguars have done it.
So if I had to ask you to pick a more impactful new face on the depth chart on offense this year, in your opinion, would Mitch Morse at center or Brian Thomas be a more needle-moving player? Because you talk about, and Dolphins fans will resonate with not being able to run in short yardage situations and struggles on 3rd and 1, and you don't just get up under center and run power because it's not a strength, or you don't feel like you have the horses up front to do it. So I'm really interested in your thoughts there as far as which one of those guys you think maybe moves the needle more for Jacksonville.
That's an interesting question, so I'll answer it with a little bit of nuance. If you're looking for the dude that's going to make the bigger plays, it's obviously going to be the wide receiver, BTJ. If you're looking for the guy that'll have the most quiet impact, it's going to be Mitch Morse. And the reason for that, Kyle, is centers and offensive linemen, you don't notice them until they do something wrong. So therefore, I think with Mitch Morse, he doesn't have to be great. He's 32 years old. I'm sure if he was great, they wouldn't have allowed him to be a free agent. He's just got to be good, and he's got to be a veteran, and he's got to be smart, and he's got to be better than what they had, which was Luke Fortner, who quite honestly probably isn't very much stronger than I am. And that became a huge problem, especially when you have offensive linemen that are pulling guards and tackles. Don't need to be jumping over and hurdling people that are laying on the ground. And that's exactly what they had last year with Luke Fortner. Hopefully just toe the line, man. You don't have to win every one, but just at least 50-50 me if you're Mitch Morrison. They made deep playoff runs with Buffalo, and I think people around here are confident that at least give me a C+ or a B- at that spot, and I think we'll be better.
Now, I look at you guys over on defense, and whether it's Josh Hines-Allen, Trayvon Walker, Eric Armstead, Devon Hamilton, you got some heavy-handed dudes that are really physical up front. And I know we'll get a little bit of the Dolphins and their offense with the offensive line matchup specifically in the next segment. But I wanted to ask you about the group behind that, because I look at their front. It's very Trent Baalke-esque. I think it fits Trent to a T as far as what his track record as an executive and a guy who builds teams. But you look at the length at linebacker. I look at corner, specifically this overlap of Antonio Johnson as a safety with Darnell Savage, who's been a safety, but also kind of a nickel. How do you expect all that to fit together? Because Miami obviously is going to look at this matchup and say, hey, we got the athletes in the space to create space. How do you think those matchups are going to come together for Jacksonville behind what is very clearly a very strong defensive front?
So that's a great question, because they've had slot problems forever, and they've been pretty decent at corner. Not great, but good enough. Most people attributed the Jaguars' struggles to their scheme. That not that it was a bad scheme, because it's the Todd Bowles scheme from Tampa, but you and I know this as well as anyone that scheme has to match personnel, right? And if it doesn't, you have a problem. So they bring in Ryan Nielsen, a defensive line coach by trade that believes in everything downhill, pressure, mixing and matching up front, usually starting out with an even front. So when you mentioned Darnell Savage, I even asked this to Trent Baalke. You're going to ask him to do something he didn't really do. And Baalke said, yeah, he didn't play a whole bunch of slot. Hopefully the Jaguars, like most teams that run an even front, will end up in a 4-2-5 for about 65 or 70% of the game. And when that happens, I think that's where you're going to see Darnell Savage in the slot. They believe he has the athleticism and the toughness to be able to do that in sort of a way that Chauncey Gardner-Johnson plays the position, right? And when they go split safeties in the back, or if it's single high, you can get Antonio Johnson either in the middle of the field playing a little bit of a hybrid role, or he can actually split off and be in the back with Andre Sisco. Everything is going to come into fruition, though, with the front. If the front can get pressure, the DBs don't have to cover as long. They're going to play a lot of man, a lot of man bail, a lot of press man. That means they expect things to happen quickly. If they don't happen quickly up front, they might be in a little bit of trouble. They got a real good linebacker from side to side in Foyesade Oluwakan, who's been at the top of the league in tackles for like 3 straight years. The other spot is either Devin Lloyd or Chad Muma. It's probably going to be split a little bit. Sometimes they go to an old standard 4-3 where you have all 3 linebackers on the field. I anticipate against Miami what you're going to see, though. You're going to see more nickel to be able to deal with those guys in the back. And you're probably going to see a little bit of man off just in case somebody catches the ball and ain't nobody behind them. With those running backs being as fast as they are too, the one thing you don't want to be is in straight man to man, and all of a sudden there's a dump off and the running back's running behind you and you got your back turned chasing Tyreek Hill down the field. So you can get to the point where you have a lot of big plays. It's all going to come down to, can the front reestablish and claim that line of scrimmage as their own, to make things very, very difficult, to make Miami want to have to get the ball out of their hands quickly. And then it's just a matter of tackling on the back end.
It's an interesting case of strength versus strength. Nobody threw the ball faster on average last year than Miami, 2.36 seconds from snap to release on average for the entire body work for Tua last year. So I think that's a really fascinating transition for us to kind of get into Miami side of things. Questions that you have, we'll start with Miami on offense. And we're going to bring that your way next here on this Crossover Thursday episode here on the Locked On Network. So make sure that you stick with us. Today's crossover episode is sponsored by Prize Picks. And if you want to get into the action this weekend yourself, Prize Picks is the way to do it. They're America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active users. Prize Picks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike in other apps on Prize Picks, it's you against the numbers. It's not you against countless other people or those other 5 million active users. You just have to beat the house. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you can watch your winnings roll in. You can now win up to 10 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONNFL on Prize Picks and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to get the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. Tony, I yield the floor. What do you want to know about the Miami Dolphins?
All right. So, for us football heads, and a lot of our fans are the same way, this is going to be very interesting. If you're a casual, you got to hang around a little bit to really understand what I'm about to ask, because I'm about to go straight trenches on both sides of the ball. I think we look at teams sometimes and we get fascinated with corners, and we get fascinated with the ability of Jalen Ramsey and guys on the back end, and then Tyreek and Waddle and all of that speed. Mm-hmm. The game is still won with blocking and tackling. And I talked about the Jaguars trying to go claim their line of scrimmage as their own. They need to do it on both sides of the ball, and Miami has a perceived weakness on both sides of the ball in the trenches. So we'll start with the offensive line. Have they got it together? Is it better? I know Connor Williams, I believe he's still out, if he still even plays for Miami, but I know he was a free agent and he was like their best player. What are they doing on the offensive line to be able to help Tua maybe not have to get rid of the ball so quickly?
So I don't know that the school of thought from a protection scheme has necessarily changed. So the depth chart came out, and their left to right offensive line is Teron Armstead, Robert Jones, who played about 450, 500 snaps last year, was an undrafted free agent tackle out of Middle Tennessee State, has a good anchor, maybe not the most dynamic athlete, but he did lose about 15 pounds this past offseason. So he's cut down to try and collect a little bit more athleticism. They signed a name that you and Jacksonville fans are going to be familiar with. Aaron Brewer is now the center. He was the center last year in Tennessee, playing for a couple of quarterbacks that did like to hold the ball for quite some time. And it wasn't necessarily a big strength of Brewer's game, but you anticipate them getting up onto the second level and all their outside zone stuff where they're looking to create flow. They feel he's a really good fit in that regard. Liam Eichenberg is currently projected as the starting right guard. He's been kind of the flex center guard, utility, sixth offensive lineman type. He's capable of playing all five spots. He's currently listed as the starting right guard. Isaiah Wynn would be the left guard, but he's still on the PUP list after he had some kind of quad injury last year. Don't really know when we're counting on seeing him, and I'm not counting any chickens in that regard. And then Austin Jackson, who was a nice breakout player for the Dolphins offense last year, fitting within the scheme, within what they want to do. If you're ever expecting the Dolphins to 3 yards in a cloud of dust you and come downhill at you, you're always going to be left wanting more, because the core principles of the Shanahan wide zone system, it's about urgency and horizontal stress that they can place on defenses. So when I look at Jacksonville, I look at Trayvon and I look at Josh Hines-Allen, and then I look at the tackles along with the tight end, fullback, flex players that play on the edge, and they are very critical for this matchup, because I don't think you're going to take 290-pound Aaron Brewer and say, hey, go block Devon Hamilton and go run in the A-gaps. It's just not going to happen, right? So they build all their play-action passing, and they're very play-action-oriented passing attack. A lot of their pass reps look like run reps, where everybody, it's urgency off the ball, a lot of flow. Maybe we leave the end man on the line of scrimmage unblocked and try and influence him and bluff him with a tight end where he slips underneath of him, and then you have your immediate first progressions in the flat. And if he sucks down into the run game, then you can kind of boot and go through your progressions and work down the field. So I don't think Miami's going to try to lock horns with you and say, okay, let's get into you-know-what contest in this regard. They know what they are and they know what they're not. And for Dolphins fans, it's been a point of frustration, because they want to be able to say, okay, it's 3rd and 2. Just get under center and run the darn ball and push the pile. But that's in direct conflict with the wide zone system and the things that are required to effectively run the wide zone. So they're not compromising their morals and their pillars of their identity in order to be able to do that. So I do think Jacksonville is going to have a physical advantage. Miami's game plan and scheme is going to be around doubling the guys on the edges with a skill player and a tackle to create that stress, and then allow the back to make his read off of what the action is there on the edge. And from there, they're going to be charged with trying to string out your front with angles on the back end of these combinations and then try and get up onto the second level on the linebackers. And if the front door's closed, then I'm going to go look through each one of the windows. And if I got to go all the way out the back door and cut all the way up back against the grain, we'll do that too.
You mentioned the word frustrated, and I can only imagine that from a weekly basis. It's really hard to criticize the NFL passing leader and Mostert with all of those touchdowns, and Tyreek being one of the 5 most dynamic players, maybe even 3 most dynamic players in the league. The frustration, do you get the frustration of knowing that when you get to the point where you're playing a really, really good team, that will negate some of that stuff, and you have to be able to either run when you want to or you have to? The fact that it doesn't seem like it's naturally ingrained into their DNA, they can't turn that on and off when they want to, can they?
No. And I think part of the solution, I actually did a show last week on Thursday, and it was looking at their 12 and 21 personnel usages. And everybody thinks about the wide receivers and Odell, who's on the pup and is not going to play in this game. But Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, and understandably, you as the play caller, you want to get those guys the ball. They're your best players. But there's some, and we'll get into this on the defensive side of the ball too. I think there's some structural things that you can do from personnel to give yourself a better chance to do those things at a higher level. And for Miami, they got into 3rd and 6 and less, and they passed the ball 100 something times, and they might have ran it 25 times. It was very lopsided because some of the other ancillary players, if we bring a second tight end on the field or we bring a fullback on the field, it's very easy to just bracket your 2 wide receivers. The other guys we can leave in one-on-ones and play man coverage against and trust that they're not going to win their matchups. So that was the thought process behind adding a Jonnu Smith, to try to bring a second tight end on the field. Not to say, hey, we're just going to run downhill at you every single time and push the pile, but to present a menu of enough possible plays that they can call that you have to honor it. And if you overplay one or the other, they can make you pay for it. So I think that's Mike McDaniel, for all of his play calling prowess that he has. There's a confidence that I can call the right plays to work around the problems that we fundamentally have because we're choosing to invest where we want to invest.
I think
that falls on him.
Yeah, you're right. So in a nutshell, if we talk about the line of scrimmage and we flip it, if there's an Achilles heel for Jacksonville, I think it's the offensive line, because quite frankly, they haven't played that often together. And then even when those guys have played, you've been able to nitpick the games, other than right tackle Anton Harrison. I think he's great. And I know you and Joe Marino will love that, because y'all probably talked about him in the draft. He's been fabulous, okay? The other part of it for me is somehow that's a Miami weakness when I thought it was going to be a strength, but then Bradley Chubb isn't healthy, and you guys had an early retirement. Even though you drafted Chop Robinson, there's some question about his ability to set the edge as a run defender this early in his career. They brought in Calais Campbell. It didn't work out. What have they done on the front 7, and mainly the line, that could give them an advantage against the Jacksonville team that is probably looking to upgrade their play from a year ago?
Yeah, so I think this is a much better scheme fit for Emmanuel Ogbah, who was where the team turned when Shaq Barrett retired, as they brought Emmanuel Ogbah back. Length, heavy hands. That's kind of his MO. I think you'll see him rotate quite a bit with Chop Robinson. Early downs will probably be a little bit more Ogbah to the formational strength. And then that way you've got either a nickel or a linebacker that's leveraged outside of that. So to give you kind of that range to the outside if runs do press outside. So I think you'll see a platoon there with Chop, obvious passing down in distances, and Emmanuel Ogbah. The team did get Jalen Phillips back 2 weeks ago. He tore his Achilles on Black Friday last year. He was cleared for practice. He's been practicing for 2 weeks. Just an unreal recovery window from him. They've been very complimentary of his recovery. I think you may see him on some degree of a snap count early on as far as getting him back into the swing of things, but that'll help. The other guys that they have, I think Calais Campbell, when you're in your odd front looks, and if Jacksonville has success running the ball, I think you'll see maybe a little bit more of the bare fronts where they cover up the 3 interior guys. And Calais will be one of those guys covering up a guard. But if they go even front, I think you can see Calais Campbell push out and be the other offensive, or the guy who's rushing against an offensive tackle when they go 4 down. So I think that flexibility gives them enough between Phillips, Calais, Agba platooning with Chop Robinson to kind of piece it together. It's just a challenge of, are guys playing too much because they want to be able to rotate at a pretty high level. And they'll have some of those guys are going to have their work cut out from them early in the season before Bradley Chubb comes back and can obviously take on a majority workload of one of those spots.
I guess in segment 3 now, man, we got to go to the keys and figure out who's going to win this thing. All
right. So that's coming your way next year on this Crossover Thursday. Make sure that you stick with us. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role, and that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to find the right professionals for your team faster and for free, because LinkedIn is not just any other job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a job but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users do not visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. Tony, you said it, but before we get there, today's episode of Crossover Thursday is sponsored by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code in all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. Prize Picks, run your game. Keys to the game here, Jaguars, Dolphins. Tony, what are the keys for Jacksonville?
Jacksonville has to score touchdowns. Miami can play poorly and have 4 plays and hit 28 points because they're so combustible, so explosive, so sudden. The Jaguars had problems last year in the red zone. We talked about their inability to run the ball, and then it became Trevor versus 11 players and the back line. And a lot of times they had to rely on field goals. And then that was fine until they started missing field goals. They were 8-3 and the offense hadn't played well. That just tells you that everything was hard. Nothing was easy. So I do believe they have to score early. They have to convert a lot of their red zone appearances into touchdowns when they can. You're not going to score a touchdown every single time. But I just believe the Jaguars, when they cross the 40-yard line, have to get more points than they did last year when they had field goal issues. They had down and distance issues. They were turning the ball over on downs because they were going for it on 4th and 6 because they didn't feel confident in Brandon McManus making field goals. That's just for a team that is searching for an identity and searching for something. You can't keep getting to the river and not drinking water. You're just going to the river for no reason, and then you're turning around thirsty. So I think they have to capitalize on their opportunities. And obviously, from a coach speak standpoint, they got to tackle. The game is still about blocking and tackling. And last but not least, they cannot turn the ball over.
Yep. And that's a great place to start for me. I look at this matchup. My 3 keys for Miami is negating Evan Ingram, who became a really good safety blanket. I think with the corners, the Dolphins will have a lot of flexibility as far as how they want to choose to play the matchups. But I look at Ingram and the Dolphins the past few years, it's been a really sore spot trying to defend the middle of the field against tight ends and running backs. And obviously ETN's a piece of that puzzle as well. But when a dude's getting 350 targets last year, Evan Ingram, I mean, he became the security blanket and a guy who, when Trevor needed completions, he found them and he converted those targets into receptions at a very high rate. I think interrupting that while you're playing your matchups with your other players is really essential for Miami. I think Miami getting pressure, untraditional pressure with 4 is important as well. The Anthony Weaver scheme coming over from Baltimore is very well renowned for its pressure being aggressive, but doing so with simulated pressures where they're showing 4 potential rushers, but those aren't the rushers who are coming. And that's why you look at the addition of Jordan Brooks, who they brought in from Seattle, who's a really dynamic former first-round pick at linebacker. He's really good at pressuring from depth. Jalen Ramsey getting back to playing in the nickel. Before he came to Miami and Vic Fangio had him playing exclusively outside corner, he had found this resurgence as a player who could play inside, play in the nickel, move around, play some matchups, but then pressure. And with his length off the edge, he had some really splash plays. We didn't see that from Jalen Ramsey last year. So be ready to drop somebody out in your obvious passing situations. Bring somebody who's away from where you think they're going to turn the center in Mitch Morse. And if you can get those free runners and pressure Trevor, I think that's a big piece of the puzzle. And then the last one was a point of emphasis that Miami has talked about their players and their coaches throughout this offseason, which is controlling the ball. A lot of explosive plays. Like you mentioned, you can really struggle to move the ball, hit a couple of explosive plays, and you look up, you still got 24, 27 points. But for Miami, they want to be more methodical. They want to be more balanced. They don't want to turn around and run their offense back or their defense back out there after a 2-minute scoring drive that wins 70 yards because they hit a 55-yard bomb with consistency. So that doesn't mean you have to sit here 3 yards in a cloud of dust or run into the strength of Jacksonville's front if that's a mismatch that you're not finding success with. But if Jacksonville's going to play off man, find easy completions. Don't get greedy. Make sure you're methodically working the ball down the field and don't make mistakes in those moments that's going to set you behind the sticks or have a turnover as well.
One of the things that scared me when I saw the schedule and I realized we had a coaching change here in Jacksonville on the defensive side of the ball, that was going to be a total schematic change from what we did last year. Last year, they were odd front, had Trayvon Walker and Joshua Hines-Allen. Believe it or not, they led the league as a duo in sacks, but they were dropping in coverage all the time. We got sick of seeing 275-pound dudes back out in the flat, right? So now it's an even front, more traditional. Trayvon's going to be used a little bit better, but this was not the matchup for new team, new scheme. I said it all off season, and somebody asked Doug Peterson yesterday in the press conference, is Miami a good matchup for this new defense? He goes, no, and thank you for reminding me, because with new schemes sometimes comes communication issues. Mm-hmm. Have a communication issue against a team that has a track team on the field is like a whole bunch of 80-yard touchdowns. So you could be doing everything right. This is like the wrong team to make a mistake against. And the mistakes sometimes are natural when this is the first live action and you can't really simulate a game in practice. That's going to be the key for me. I don't want, if Jaguar fans see something going wrong and it looks like it's a colossal personnel issue, it probably isn't. It's probably more that everything's new and that this is the wrong team. It's like your first time playing chess and you're sitting down with Bobby Fischer. That's just not good, you know?
It's really interesting because Miami has that same experience with their defense too, with Weaver bringing in a new scheme that's a little bit of a mismatch, or of a mashup, I should say, of what Vic did this past year, Fangio, and then what the Brian Flores, Josh Boyer type scheme was for 3 seasons before that. But there's so much new. I look at, Jacksonville offensively, they got athletes too. So I think this talking point definitely cuts both ways. I think Miami probably in this individual talking point does have the advantage because there's some new receivers for Jacksonville too, whereas a timing-based offense too. This is the first time since high school Tua has had the same offensive scheme for 3 straight seasons, and he's had Waddle and Hill for all of that. So them being the pillar players, as you'd expect, if the Dolphins are going to get it done, those guys are probably going to have a big hand in getting it done. And we will see. Tony, Kyle, Locked On Jags, Locked On Dolphins. Tony, it was great chatting with you, man.
I know it, man. And guess what? We're here. So we talked about that. And it's been a long off season. And we're finally here where real football matters. I know we've been watching the collegiate game. It ain't nothing like the NFL, man. We've got real football. Nice matchup to start this thing out in the state of Florida. It's top versus bottom, man. Let's see who's going to win it.
Yep, and best of luck to you. Best of luck this season. I hope you enjoy it. Here's to a healthy game on Sunday. For all of the Dolphins post-game reactions, head on over to Locked On Dolphins. For all the Jaguars post-game reactions, Tony will have you covered on Locked On Jaguars, the Locked On Network. It's your teams every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. You can find us on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Make it a great rest of your day and enjoy the game on Sunday.